Hey, by the way, before we get into today's episode, would you send us an email? Let us know your thoughts. redditreadings.podcast@gmail.com. We'll put that email address in the show notes as well. But one more time, it's redditreadings.podcast@gmail.com. And Andy is going to be reading everything today. So I like this one. This one's fun. From r/ProRevenge. From user Donut Clouds. That sounds delicious. Throw trash in my yard. Enjoy moving.
My now ex-neighbor was pretty trashy. Cars sitting on blocks in the yard, cigarette hanging out of her mouth while she's 9 months pregnant. Blasting Kid Rock tunes level trashy. Well, this lady decided that paying $1 per trash bag was just too much. Our township will only pick up your trash if it is in one of the approved purple bags though. So, normal trash bags will just be left behind. The trash truck drives right past them. Her solution? Buy normal trash bags at the dollar store and have her 8-year-old child toss them over the fence into my yard. Now, their trash is my problem. After confronting her, she just laughed. So I called the cops. They said that since the kid was so young and there was no proof his parents told him to do it, there was nothing they could do. So this went on for about 4 months. Me taking the bags of trash they toss into my yard, wrapping them in purple bags I paid for out of pocket, and putting them out to the curb. Pretty fucking annoying. Not to mention the extra $3 or so a week I'm spending on trash bags. I'm slowly growing to hate this woman. It was annoying at first, but I was getting mad. Mind you, I own my home, and she was renting hers. So I get a hold of their landlord, and I offer to buy the house for a decent amount above market value, 17%. He jumps at the offer, and soon I'm the proud owner of the house next door to me. Sure, it cost me $71,000, but what price do you put on peace of mind? The very first thing I did was serve them an eviction notice. In person. Across that same fence they like to throw trash over. That was 31 days ago. As of today, the unit is empty. I don't know where they went, but they're someone else's problem now. All because she didn't want to pay for her own trash bags. I think I'm going to knock that house down and make my yard bigger. I've been wanting to put in a handball court. You know, there is a special place in hell, way, way, way down there, that's reserved for women and men, I suppose, that weaponize their children. You know what I mean. They're children, for fuck's sakes, not tools. This next one is from Viper 30,000. Turnabout is always fair play. I'm not sure if this one belongs here, as I'm not the one actually wronged. My revenge was taken for someone I have never met, and I honestly don't know if they personally got any satisfaction from it. I do know what it did to the perpetrator, and that it satisfied me. So I'll let the readers decide. Like many of my tales, this one takes place in the distant past, before cell phones were common and before universal caller ID was the norm. In a time dinosaurs most likely roamed the earth. Well, the 80s at least. These things are very important to the story. Our tale takes place in a large West Coast city known for a big orange bridge and delicious sourdough bread. I was living in the city for several months, working temporary duty for my company, and was preparing for work on the day in question. As was my custom, I was getting dressed listening to the morning radio show on a local station. This station's jock had started doing something called the Monday morning wake-up call, where, on the first day of the week, they would make a prank call on the air to a victim chosen from write-in suggestions from the listening audience. Doing this was actually very controversial in radio circles at the time. I'd been a radio DJ in my hometown for a few years, and there are rules you must follow. One of the biggest rules is that you can't make a false or deceptive radio transmission, like announcing an emergency, sending an SOS, or cry for help, or other such deceptions. Doing so is a federal offense. Doing so can lose your license and be fined or even jail time. It's a big no-no. The debate has long since been decided, but at the time doing prank calls on the air was a grey area. There were people who were sure it constituted a false transmission, and some stations refused to do it. The argument was still alive at the time this happened. This day happened to be Monday, and the intended victim had been nominated by her husband. They had experienced a power failure at home earlier in the week, and the husband's suggestion was that the station call his wife, claim to be from the utility, and tell her that the power outage was somehow their fault and they'd have to pay for it. The station staff loved the idea, and they proceeded to call the wife at her place of employment, a local bank. The victim answered the prank, began the phone call.
Hello, is this Mrs. Victim? I'm John Doe from Area Power Company. Do you remember having a power failure earlier this week? Well, it was due to a blown transformer on your block, and we've determined that the cause is a wiring fault in your house. We may have to cut off your power until you get it fixed. Also, you're going to be charged for the transformer. The total cost is X thousand dollars. Would you prefer to put that on your utility bill, or do you want to make other arrangements to pay?
As you might imagine, the woman was shocked, then scared. As she asked for more information, having trouble believing that they were going to have to pay thousands of dollars, she got increasingly more upset. This egged the radio staff on. The guy making the call kept increasing the pressure on her more and more, eventually telling her that power would likely be cut off until payment was made, and that there might be a lawsuit. After several minutes, she suddenly hung up in tears. He called her back, and when she heard his voice, she hung up again, crying even harder. This time, the guy waited a minute, and then called back again. Another lady answered the phone, a co-worker, and he asked to speak to Mrs. Victim. When the co-worker asked his name, he replied,
This is her husband.
Her husband had a very distinctive name. The co-worker cursed at him, called him a liar, and hung up. The radio station was filled with laughter. The jocks thought it was hilarious. They took calls from listeners who were all laughing and talking about what a great prank it was. They finally got the husband on the phone, he of the distinctive name, and he was also laughing and joking that he'd surely be sleeping on the sofa tonight. He was congratulating the radio staff on a fine job they had done terrorizing his wife. The radio hosts promised the listening audience that because the prank was so funny, they would certainly be playing the whole recorded prank again at noon. So,
Be sure to be listening and call your friends.
I, in my efficiency apartment listening to this, was getting mad. I was still pretty newly married and couldn't imagine doing something like that to my wife. All I could think of while the staff and listeners on the radio were laughing was that a few miles away, a young woman was in the ladies' room crying, probably with co-workers trying to calm her down. What made it worse to my mind was that the guy that set her up for this was the one guy in the world who should have her back, her husband. Anger turned to resolve. Resolve formed a plan. I grabbed the city phone book, remember it's the 80s, and looked up 2 phone numbers. I called the first one. You may remember that I said I'd been a radio disc jockey myself. It was a tiny dawn to dusk station, but I knew how stations worked. I knew what they liked, and more to the point, I knew what they did not like. I also had done a lot of voiceover work and could sound professional as heck. The phone rang and was answered.
You've reached K Radio Jerk.
I launched my attack.
Yes, this is George Smith from the City Office of the Federal Communications Commission. I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show. I need to speak to your program director to discuss it. Not here right now. Let me get someone else.
I was put on hold, and after a few moments...
Hi, hello? This is Radio Guy 2. You're from the FCC? Yes, this is George Smith from the City Office of Federal Communications Commission. As I told your co-worker, I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show, and I need to speak to your program director to discuss it. He's not in yet. He'll be here at 9 o'clock. Okay, well I can start with your station manager, since he'll need to be in on the conversation as well. He gets in at 9 too. I can have him call you? Very well, I'll expect to hear from him at 9. I'll need to speak to your station manager, your programming director, and very likely your on-air personnel from this morning. I'll also need your station logs. Yes sir, I'll make sure he calls you right away. Alright, I'll be expecting his call. Here's my number.
At this point, I gave Radio Guy 2 the second number I'd looked up in the phone book, the main number for the City Office of Federal Communications Commission. Radio Guy 2 stammered his thanks and promises of phone calls, and we hung up. I went back to the radio.
Uh-oh, the FCC is calling. Well, they can't do anything to me. I've got years of pre-law in college and blah, 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 blah.
He continued his defiance for a few minutes and then went to commercial. I kept listening. They stopped talking about the prank call. They stopped taking phone calls from listeners. They stopped talking to the husband. They started playing music. A lot of music. I listened for the rest of the day. They didn't talk about it the rest of that day, and they didn't replay it at noon. In fact, for the rest of the week, I listened and heard nothing about it. I was a bit surprised. I figured that they might stop talking about it for a little while, but not altogether. It wasn't until later that I realized why they went so silent. I had scared them. In my quest to get a little vengeance for that crying woman I've never met, I scared them, but more to the point, I'd embarrassed them. The jerk disc jockey had helped. Once he went live with his bravado against a call from the feds, their listeners knew they'd been called and heard the silence afterwards too. They were embarrassed because I had just done to them what they had done to her, and they didn't want to have to admit it. I've kept the rather distinctive name of the husband a secret because I have always wished that I could meet that poor woman, and that name would be how I would know it was really her. I doubt she's still married to the guy, but I'd like to let her know that in that place, on that day, someone had her back. This next one is in from Top Dessert. Thank you, Dunnachius, for reminding me of this fun story of revenge. Info leading up to the revenge. So, back a while, at my other job at an animal shelter, myself and a couple of co-workers were talking, and one co-worker mentioned that her son's car kept getting messed up in the student parking lot at the high school. So I asked why, and she said that apparently another student has it in his head that one particular spot in the student parking lot is his, despite there never having been assigned parking spots at that school. Now, this kid, who I'll call Little Shit, has a tow truck. Not even one of those big flatbed trucks, it's a shitty little beater pickup with a tow hook in the back. If you've seen the movie Cars, think slightly bigger than Mater. Anyway, whenever someone parks in Little Shit's spot, he then tows that person's car out and parks in the aforementioned spot, usually damaging the vehicle in the process. Well, while my co-worker was telling us this, I said, "Ha, you know what would be funny? Parking the Bearcat in the spot and weighing it down. It'd be fucking hilarious to see that little shit try and tow that big chungus of a vehicle." The chief of police was chatting with us. The animal shelter in my hometown is considered part of the police department, and officers will occasionally visit us every once in a while. And he laughed and said, "Yeah, I'd love to see that." The revenge. So to start, the state I live in, according to the laws, moving a vehicle a certain distance without the owner's consent and without proper towing permits is considered vehicle theft. I was told this story a few days later, so here's how it went down. The police chief placed a bait truck in the parking spot and set up a couple of undercover units close by, and the truck itself was weighed down with a crapload of cement bags. My coworker said she was surprised the truck didn't collapse under its own weight. Sure as shit, Little Shit shows up, sees the truck in his spot and attempts to tow it away. Now, the plan was for the undercovers to come out and arrest him right then and there. What happened was that Little Shit did a burnout trying to move the truck. He was successful for a few feet, at least the bare minimum for a misdemeanor. And then the back axle popped out of the truck. The undercovers came out and arrested Little Shit. The camera footage was obtained which showed the roughly 100 other times he'd done this, which of course only bumped up his charges. Our next story is from you/remarkable-youth-504. Do not want me to work my notice? Okay, I will not work during my notice. I was working in an organization that was super toxic. So much so that we were a revolving door. Most employees stayed only for a few months. To counter this, our management put a 3-month notice into everyone's contract, including the existing employees. It's not strictly illegal where this happened, but very unusual. I believe the idea behind that was to make it harder for employees to find a job outside, as potential employers didn't usually want to wait for 3 months. However, this didn't work, as most people simply quit and waited for a month or two before starting their job hunt. I was there for almost 4 years. I needed the money, so I put up with whatever abusive shit was thrown at me. My boss was a guy we'll call Vince, not his actual name, obviously. Now, Vince was not particularly good, but he sometimes respected the fact that I was the most tenured grunt in this organization. Do note that after about 2 years, I was doing a lot of additional work in addition to my official responsibilities, primarily because I was the only one who knew how to do those. Everyone else had already left. This will become important later. Enter Rajesh, also not his actual name. Rajesh was poached from a somewhat infamous company and was literally flown in from a different continent. He was brought in to strategically improve our division. This was quite strange given that our division generated most profits. Within months, Rajesh made the environment even more toxic. He pulled Vince's team under him and got Vince fired, and he actively encouraged us grunts to spy on each other. Rajesh also had it out for me from day one. Until today, I don't know why. He started making my life much harder than the others. This culminated in him taking me aside and telling me I was not pulling my weight. Now at this point, I was doing quite well in the organization, plus I had been doing a lot of additional work critical to our business since only I knew certain systems and processes. See high attrition above. So I was quite angry. I started looking out. I wasn't still brave enough to quit and start looking. Fortunately, I was able to find a job that was willing to wait the 3 months. So it was my turn to take Rajesh aside and tell him I quit. Oh boy, Rajesh was pissed. He went from denial, "You can't quit," to negotiation, "What if I give you a raise at the end of the year?" before acceptance. Thus, I was serving my notice and working away like an honest bee, my usual work plus the additional work. At this point, I was called in by HR and told that Rajesh wanted me gone. The insane part was that they wanted me to pay the company for the 2.5 months shortfall in notice. I obviously refused, then went back and checked the contract. Turns out that a notice of less than 3 months could only happen through mutual consent, and the initiating party, company if they wanted me gone sooner or me if I wanted to leave earlier, had to compensate the other party for the shortfall. The next day, I stopped doing almost all of my work. I logged in, logged out my hours, and did jack shit. I stopped doing any additional work that I have been doing and started taking it really slow on my primary job responsibilities. Since no one else understood the details of what I did, I knew it would be very hard for Rajesh or HR to prove that I was doing any of this on purpose. Then, I sat back with my popcorn. Soon there was a complete meltdown all around. Rajesh would pull me into meetings and scream and try to bully me, and I'd say nothing but smirk in his face. Next, they tried to have someone else learn the additional work I used to do from me so that they could do what I did. Remember earlier how I said I was the only one that knew some of the old systems and processes? Well, now I claimed I didn't really remember any of them, so obviously there could be no handover. Rajesh could do nothing, as none of this had been my responsibility or part of my contract, since the leadership had been only too happy to see me do this for free. Soon, my workplace turned into a dumpster fire. Then HR and Rajesh smartened up and offered to buy out my notice if I cooperated and helped transition my work. I refused. Then, to twist the knife further, I started having meetings with fellow grunts. Remember, everyone was always a newbie? And encouraging them to leave as well. Indirectly, nothing that could implicate me. HR tried to get me to leave twice more, but I ended up serving the full 3 months. Remember the mutual consent part?
So thanks for being with us. The RR Show is a production of Evergreen Podcasts and Wessler Media. Now, if you'd be so kind, please follow or subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra nice, you might as well leave a 5-star review. But for more, visit the website, rrshow.com. That is rrshow.com. I'm your host, Vince. Thank you to my producer, Kevin, and we'll see you next time here on the RR Show.